The engine cut out. That was always the moment Vera Doss liked best. Not the riding, though she had spent more hours on a Harley than she had spent in any house she had ever called hers. It was the silence after. That single breath when the road stopped talking and the world went still and a woman could finally hear herself think. She sat with one boot on the asphalt and the other still on the peg and let the quiet settle over her the way quiet settles over a person who has learned to receive it rather than fill it. 63 years old, 30 years of roads behind her, give or take, and the roads had given her certain things that other kinds of living could not. The ability to be still inside motion. The ability to arrive somewhere new and see it clearly without the filter of expectation. Denton, Texas spread out before her in the mid-morning light of an October Tuesday. It was the kind of town that looked exactly the same as it had 30 years ago and was quietly proud of that fact. A water tower with the town's name painted in faded blue. A hardware store with hand-lettered signs. A barber shop with a pole that still turned. Streets wide enough for two trucks to pass each other without hurrying. On the corner of Main Street and Callaway Avenue, there was a small diner with a hand-painted sign above the door. May's Diner. She did not know why she pulled in. She had passed a dozen diners in the last 100 miles and passed them all without slowing. Something about the morning light on the windows maybe. Or maybe it was just that her coffee had run out 2 hours back and her body had started making demands her stubbornness did not want to acknowledge. At 63, the body won more arguments than it used to, which was either wisdom or surrender, and she had not yet decided which. Vera swung off the bike and stood still for a moment the way she always did. The Army had built this habit into her, and 20 years of open road had reinforced it until she could no more stop doing it than she could stop breathing. She scanned the lot before she moved. 3 vehicles. One old Ford pickup with a VFW bumper sticker from a post in Abilene. One sedan, the color of compromise. One county sheriff's cruiser at the far end of the lot, engine cold, the man inside not getting out. The cruiser had been there a while. She noted it the way she noted everything, quietly without changing her expression, filing it in the place behind her eyes, where people who had done her kind of work kept the things that did not quite add up. She walked to the door and went inside. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something sweet. Cherry pie, she could see it through the glass case on the counter, deep red filling, and a crust that had been done right. The floors were old hardwood, worn smooth by decades of the same paths between the same tables. The booths were dark red vinyl patched in 2 places with tape that had been color matched well enough that you almost did not notice. Almost. Vera took the corner booth, back to the wall, sight lines to the door, the counter, the pass-through window to the kitchen. She had not thought about positioning herself that way. She simply did it the same way she had been doing it since 1991, since the Gulf, since the days when choosing the wrong seat could end a person's story before they were ready for it to end. She set her jacket on the seat beside her. Worn black leather, no patches, no club insignia. She had ridden with groups over the years, loose associations of people who understood the language of the road, but she had never worn another organization's colors on her back. Some people needed the belonging badly enough to make it official. Vera had always kept to her attachments quieter than that. Her left forearm rested on the table. The tattoo there had softened with age the way all things soften. The edges blurred, the colors muted to something closer to shadow than ink. But the image was still readable, an eagle with its wings spread over a banner. Below it, in letters that had faded to the texture of memory, Desert Storm 91. She was reading the menu when the woman came out from the kitchen. Small. That was the first thing. Not fragile, not decorative, but genuinely small, in the way some women are, the kind of small that has nothing at all to do with diminishment. Her hair was white and pinned back with the efficiency of a woman who had long since stopped spending time on things that did not matter. She wore a blue and white checked apron over a plain blouse, and she moved through the diner the way experienced people move through spaces they have inhabited for decades, purposeful and unhurried, not a step wasted. Her hands, when she set the coffee cup down, were the hands of someone who had worked hard for a long time, the knuckles swollen at the joints. Arthritis and not mild. Vera had seen that kind of stiffness in people who had spent years in cold weather doing heavy work, and she understood what it meant about mornings, about the cost of simply beginning each day. The cup was set down without a sound, not a click, not a rattle, placed exactly where it needed to be, the way something is placed when it has been placed 10,000 times, and every one of those times was done right. Passing through, the woman asked. Her voice was unhurried and warm in the way that certain voices in the South are warm. Not performance, just nature. Far enough, Vera said. The woman looked at her for a moment with eyes that were lighter than expected, a gray-green that had probably been striking once and was still in its own way very sharp. Eyes that had seen enough to recognize when someone was carrying something without being told what it was. Menu's real, the woman said. Nothing on there we can't make. Coffee's a good start, Vera said. The woman left her to it. Vera drank slowly and watched the room. The two older men by the window were local. She could tell by the way they sat rooted and at ease, the comfort of men in a place that was theirs. They were talking in the low continuous murmur of people who have been friends long enough that conversation does not require full sentences. She caught words without trying. Third time this week. Not going to sign, I'm telling you. Tanner came by again yesterday. The name landed in the back of her mind and stayed there. Not because it meant anything yet, just because her mind still worked that way, collecting and holding, waiting to find out which pieces mattered. She watched the woman May presumably move between the kitchen and the counter and the tables. Efficient and unhurried at the same time, which is harder to achieve than it sounds. She refilled the old men's coffee without being asked. She checked on the couple in the far booth with a look and a nod that acknowledged them without interrupting whatever they were in the middle of. She looked out the window twice. The second time, Vera followed her gaze. The cruiser was still there. Still nobody getting out. When May came back to refill her coffee, Vera did not ask about the cruiser. She looked instead at the 3 photographs on the wall behind the counter. 3 young men, each photographed beside a motorcycle, each grinning with the particular joy of someone who has just been handed something they wanted badly. Small letters beneath each frame. 2004. 3 sons, 3 bikes given in 3 different years, each one a separate decision, each one saved for. May saw her looking. My 3 boys, she said, and something in her voice was quieter than before, layered in the way of things that have been carried a long time. They don't make it back much these days, but they know the way home when they need to. Vera looked at her. She almost said something. She had learned over 63 years that the moments when you almost say something are usually the moments when you should wait and listen instead. She nodded, went back to her coffee, and May went back to her kitchen. She should have left after the coffee. She ordered eggs instead. They came out over easy with toast that was golden edge to edge, and she understood immediately why the floors had that particular depth of wear. She was on her second cup when the door opened. The man who walked in was large in the built-up way of someone who had spent years constructing an impression. He wore the county deputy's uniform with the ease of a man who had forgotten it was a uniform rather than a natural condition. He moved through the room without looking at the customers, without acknowledging the old men or the couple in the far booth, the way a person moves when they have decided that the people around them are scenery rather than subjects. He walked directly through to the kitchen. Did not knock. Vera set her fork down, quietly. She looked at her eggs. She listened. She could not hear specific words. She could hear the shape of them. The deputy's voice had a cadence. She recognized the cadence of a man delivering an ultimatum he had delivered before and expected to land the same way it always did. May's voice underneath it, lower, with a quality to it like old wood, the kind that does not give regardless of pressure. He came back out 2 minutes later, crossed the room, and then he stopped because he had seen Vera looking at him. She was not being aggressive about it. She was simply looking the steady, unhurried look of a person who had nothing to explain or conceal and had never therefore developed the reflex of looking away. He held it for a moment, then he went out the door. Vera picked up her fork. May came out from the kitchen. Her face had not changed much. She was practiced at that, had clearly been practicing it for some time. But Vera could see the set of her jaw and the way she was holding her shoulders and the small tells that a body gives whether the mind wants it to or not. She refilled Vera's coffee, and in the way of diners that have existed long enough to develop their own grammar, Vera understood that this was an invitation to stay. Tanner, Vera said. May looked at her. You have good ears. Old habit. May set the coffee pot on the counter and stood with her hands resting on the edge of it and looked at the window where the cruiser was no longer visible. Deputy Bryce Tanner, she said, works for Sheriff Guidry, though working for is maybe the simple way to put it. What's the less simple way? She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a stool from behind the counter and sat down and told Vera the story. It came out the way real things come out. Not neat, not linear. Pieces that connected but did not flow the way memory and circumstance connect without narrative tidiness. Vera listened the way she had been trained to listen, not building a response while the other person was still speaking, but actually receiving what was being said. Her name was May Calloway, 68 years old. She had run this diner for 41 years, first beside her husband Raymond, and then for the last 14 years alone. The building sat on the corner of Main and Callaway Avenue. Her family had been in Denton long enough that the town had put their name on a street which was either an honor or just the natural consequence of staying somewhere so long, the place began to shape itself around you. Behind the diner running west for 40 acres was the land her father had worked and her mother had kept, and Raymond had loved and was now buried in. Lone Star Energy Partners had come 8 months ago with an offer. A real offer. She did not pretend otherwise. Enough money that looking away from it required a reason. She had her reasons. She had said no. The politeness had lasted about a month. Then Calvin Morrison had started sending Tanner. And Tanner's visits had a different quality than Morrison's initial courtesy calls. He came in his uniform with his badge and said things that lived just inside plausible deniability. Nothing you could quote in a courtroom. Just the steady, oppressive weight of a man in authority making clear what he wanted and what the absence of compliance might come to mean. The deadline is Friday, May said. 10 in the morning, that's when the option they filed on my property expires. She paused. Morrison told me last week that if I haven't signed by then, things would become more complicated. What's under the land? Vera asked. Natural gas, a pocket bigger than their initial survey suggested. Have you talked to a lawyer? A good one in Dallas, but lawyers work on the clock, and the clock is expensive, and the people across the table have considerably more of both than I do. She said it without bitterness. The flatness of a person who has accepted the arithmetic and is not going to waste energy resenting it. Vera looked at her coffee. She thought about the cruiser sitting in the lot for 40 minutes. She thought about the way Tanner had walked through the diner without seeing anyone in it, the walk of a man who had never been required to be careful because no one in this town had ever made him. You're not going to sign, Vera said. No. Why? May looked at the photographs on the wall for a moment. Because Raymond is buried out there, she said, and because my father worked that ground and his father before that. She stopped, looked at the window. And because there is more to it than that. But that is a conversation for later. Vera said, you're afraid. The question landed gently without accusation. May was quiet for long enough that Vera thought she had overstepped. Then May said, yes. But fear isn't the same thing as surrender. Vera sat with Jitine. Outside, a truck rolled down Main Street. A dog in the bed with his ears pressed back in the wind. The sky was the hard, clean blue of an October morning without a cloud in it. No, Vera said, it isn't. An hour passed. The lunch crowd came and May moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for 4 decades and found in the doing of it something that steadied her. Vera stayed in the corner booth and told herself she was finishing her coffee and then admitted she was simply staying and stopped pretending otherwise. She had crossed 47 states on that Harley. No destination, no deadline, no one expecting her anywhere. There was no logical reason to remain in this diner on this Tuesday morning. She remained anyway. She was watching May carry a tray to the far table when she heard a car door. The cruiser was back. Same spot. Tanner behind the wheel arrived carefully the way you arrive when you don't want to be clocked. Vera looked at the time. 11:30. 15 minutes later, Tanner came back inside. The room changed the way rooms change when something is wrong with the temperature of a situation rather than the temperature of the air. The old men found something interesting in the middle distance. The couple went quiet. May positioned herself behind the counter. Tanner stood in the center of the diner. Vera set her coffee cup down, small sound on the table. In the specific quiet that had settled over the room it carried. Tanner's eyes moved to her. He looked at her the way certain men look at women who are not what they were expecting. Not the look of someone who saw her as a threat. The look of someone who had cataloged her as irrelevant and was vaguely irritated at having to recalibrate. He turned to May. Last time I come in here and ask nicely, he said, his voice low enough to seem almost private and loud enough to not be. Morrison's given me until Friday. You know that. So let's stop pretending there's a different way this ends. May stood behind the counter with her hands flat on the surface. My answer is the same as it was yesterday, she said, and the day before that. Something settled in Tanner's posture, the settling of a man who has decided that a conversation is over. He moved toward the counter. Vera stood up. She did it slowly. No drama, no announcement. She simply rose from the booth and stood in the open space between the tables. Not blocking anything, not placing herself between Tanner and May in a way that escalated the geometry. Just standing, vertical, present. Tanner stopped. He looked at her with an expression that moved from dismissal to irritation, to something more calculating. "This isn't your business," he said. "She's the owner. I'm a customer." Vera's voice was even. "That makes it a small amount of mine. Lady, you should sit back down." The word lady landed in the room in the way it was intended to land, as a diminishment, a reassignment of relevance. Vera had been hearing that word used that way for 63 years. It had stopped having the intended effect sometime around 1988. She looked at him steadily. "I served 8 years as military police. Desert Storm. I know what assault under color of authority looks like. I know how it's charged, and I know what happens to the career of a deputy who does it in front of a witness." The room was entirely still. Tanner's eyes moved across her face, across the faded tattoo on her forearm, across the quality of her stillness, which was not the stillness of someone frightened into immobility, but the stillness of someone who had been in enough situations to know that economy of movement was not the same as passivity. He turned back to May, and then he did it. His hand came up, and the blow landed on the left side of her face, an open-handed strike that was not about maximum damage, but about maximum message, and May went down the serving tray she had been holding, spinning away from her hands and clattering against the floor, and the cherry pie she had been carrying came apart as it fell deep red, spreading across the pale old hardwood like something irrevocable. The sound of it was not loud. That was the thing. That was what Vera would think about in the hours that followed, in the way the mind returns to the precise detail of a moment it cannot accept. It was not a loud sound. It was small. It was the sound of a large man's hand against a small woman's face, and underneath it, the sound of the floor receiving her, and those two sounds together were worse than anything loud could have been. Tanner straightened. He looked at Vera with an expression that was almost curious, waiting to see what the woman in the corner booth was going to do now. Vera walked across the room, not fast, not in the way of someone performing urgency. She crossed to where May had fallen, and she crouched down and put one hand on the older woman's shoulder, and with the other hand she checked her face the way a person checks when they have been trained to assess out rather than react, when they understand the difference between an injury that looks serious and an injury that is serious. The cheekbone would bruise. The eye would swell. But May's gaze was clear, and her breathing was steady, and what was in her eyes was not fear. It was fury. The contained, precise fury of a woman who had been enduring something for 8 months and had just been given a physical object to attach it to. Vera helped her up. May led her, which Vera understood was not a small thing. Then Vera stood and turned to Tanner, and she took out her phone. She raised it. She took a photograph. Tanner stared at her. "The hell are you doing?" "Documenting," Vera said. She lowered the phone and looked at what she had captured. Tanner in his county uniform, in a civilian establishment. The serving tray on the floor, the cherry pie spread across the hardwood, May behind her, with the redness already rising along her cheekbone. "You just assaulted a civilian while in uniform in front of a witness." "I was military police for 8 years, and I know exactly what those two facts together mean for you." "You don't know who you're talking to." "I know precisely who I'm talking to," Vera said. She said it without heat, which was worse than if she had said it with heat. "And you've just given me everything I need." Something moved in Tanner's eyes, not fear, but the first cousin of it, the moment when a man realizes the room he thought he understood has a shape he did not account for. He looked at May, his voice dropped further. "This woman won't be here forever," he said. "Friday morning, 10 o'clock. That's where this ends." He walked out. The door swung shut. The diner held its breath for a long moment. Then the refrigerator's hum came back, and the traffic sounds from Main Street and the small domestic continuations of a kitchen that had not stopped existing because something ugly had happened in the room outside it. May was looking at Vera. In her eyes there was something that was not only gratitude, something older and more complicated, the look of a person who has been managing alone for a long time and has encountered with genuine surprise the possibility that they might not have to. Vera looked down at her phone, opened her contacts. At the very bottom of the list below every name there was a single entry with no name attached. Just a symbol, a gear small and plain. She opened a message, attached the photograph, sent it. Then she pocketed the phone and looked out the window at the parking lot where Tanner's cruiser was already gone. She did not know yet what she had set in motion. She did not know about the sealed documents in a cavity behind a kitchen refrigerator, or the engineer who had disappeared 3 weeks ago, or the 12,000 people whose drinking water was sitting above a plan built on corruption and held in place by fear. She knew one thing with the clean clarity of instinct that had been earned rather than given. When May's tray had hit the floor and the cherry pie had spread across the old hardwood, A small envelope had come loose from the pocket of her apron and landed near Vera's boot. She had picked it up and held it and looked at the 3 letters written on the front. 3 letters she had not seen in more than 20 years. Not since a man she had served alongside in the Gulf had shown her a patch on a vest, and she had understood for the first time what that patch meant about the kind of loyalty that does not require explanation. HATC. Vera sat back down in her corner booth. She ordered pie, and she waited. Vera ate the pie slowly. It was the kind that takes real patience. The crust thin and properly made, the filling balanced between sweet and tart, in the way that only comes from someone who has done the same thing enough times that they have stopped thinking about it and started simply doing it right. She ate it and drank her coffee and watched the lot and did not overthink what she was still doing here. She had learned a long time ago that the moments when you think too hard about your reasons are usually the moments you talk yourself out of doing the right thing. The army had taught her that, and the road had reinforced it. Sometimes the right thing and the reasonable thing were not the same calculation, and you had to know which one mattered more. May came out from the kitchen after the lunch rush thinned. She had a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel held to her left cheekbone, and she moved through the room with the same efficiency as before, as if the peas were simply part of the afternoon's requirements. Neither of them mentioned it. That arrangement seemed right for both of them. Vera moved the Harley to the side of the building before the afternoon got far along. The lot was visible from the road, and she saw no advantage in advertising her continued presence. May watched her from the doorway without comment. When Vera came back inside, there was a fresh cup of coffee on the counter. She understood things without being told them. Vera appreciated that in a way she could not have easily articulated. She was on her 4th cup when the door opened and a woman came in who was not from here. Vera knew it the way she had always known things, through the accumulation of details that the conscious mind processed before it had time to name them. Mid-30s, a camera bag over one shoulder and a canvas tote on the other. The alertness of someone whose job required them to notice things. The expression of a person who had prepared a reason for being somewhere and was hoping not to have to use it. The woman scanned the room. Her eyes moved to Vera, briefly categorized, moved on. She took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee and spent several minutes looking at her phone in the way people look at their phones when they are actually watching the room. Vera gave her 10 minutes. Then she said, without raising her voice or her eyes from her cup, "You're not from here." The woman looked at her. "Neither are you." "No," Vera agreed, "but I'm not pretending to be." A beat. Then the woman picked up her coffee and came to the booth across from Vera and sat down and looked at her directly, which Vera respected. "Lena Marsh," she said, "Denton Courier." Vera Doss. "May told me about you." Lena wrapped her hands around her mug. "She told me what happened this morning." Vera looked at her evenly. "What are you working on? A story that started as one thing and keeps becoming something larger." She paused. 3 months ago, a man named Harold Fitch signed over 40 acres to Lone Star Energy Partners. Harold Fitch is 71 years old. He'd been refusing for 8 months. Then in the space of 1 week, he changed his mind, signed everything, and ended up in a memory care facility in Fort Worth. She looked down at her coffee. He didn't have dementia before that week. Vera was quiet. "No witnesses," Lena continued. "No police report. No hospital record. His daughter in Phoenix found out after the paperwork was already filed. She called the sheriff's office. They told her it was a civil matter." "Guidry's office," Vera said. "Guidry's office." The kitchen door swung open and May came out. She looked at the two of them, and something settled in her expression, the recognition of a moment she had been waiting for, or something close to one. She sat down at the end of the booth without being invited, which told Vera she had been preparing for this, or something like it. She untied her apron, reached into the front pocket, and placed an envelope on the table. Plain white, unsealed. 3 handwritten letters on the front. HATC. She pushed it toward Vera. Inside was a single folded sheet. Vera opened it carefully. Not a contract, not a letter. A typed summary, single-spaced, half a page with 3 signatures at the bottom. She read it the way she read things when they mattered, slowly and without reaction, making sure she understood it before she decided what to feel about it. Calvin Morrison. Bryce Tanner. Walter G. Guidry. A meeting. A plan. Names of property owners. A timeline. Harold Fitch's name was there. May Calloway's name was there. And 4 others she did not recognize. She read it twice. Set it down. "Where did this come from?" she said. "Someone in the county administration office," May said. "She gave it to me 3 weeks ago. The following Monday, she had been transferred to Amarillo. She was told it was a great opportunity. Has anyone outside this room seen this? You're looking at everyone. Vera looked at Lena. Lena was looking at the document with the expression of a person who has been following a thread for months and has just found the other end. This is enough, Lena said quietly. It's a start, Vera said. A document with 3 signatures and no corroboration can be challenged, called a forgery, called out of context. You need this to be one piece of a larger picture, not the whole thing. She looked at May. What about Fitch? Can he speak? His daughter says he has good days and bad. She doesn't think he'd survive a legal proceeding. There were others, Lena said. 3 other landowners sold before Harold. I've tried to reach them. Nobody wants to talk. Because Tanner got there first, Vera said. The words sat in the air. Vera picked up the document and read it a 3rd time. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and slid it to May. Keep this somewhere that isn't obvious, she said. Not in a drawer, somewhere they wouldn't find in a quick search. May nodded once briskly. She had already thought of this. Vera was certain of it. She looked out the window. The afternoon light had gone long and golden, coming in at an angle that turned the dust motes visible and made the ordinary interior of the diner look for a moment like something that deserved to be preserved. Down the street, a man walked a dog. A school bus went past. She was still watching the street when she heard it. A sound that began at the edge of perception and grew into something unmistakable. The specific configuration of engine noise that she had heard on different roads in different states, enough times that something in her chest recognized it before her mind had completed the recognition. Not 1 engine, 3. Running in a formation that was too even and too deliberate to be anything but intentional. She looked at May. May had heard it too, and what was in her face was not the surprise of something unexpected. It was the recognition of something hoped for and not certain arrived at the moment it was most needed. She stood and walked to the door and pushed it open and stepped outside. Vera followed. 3 Harleys came down Main Street riding abreast. They moved with the unhurried confidence of men who were not proving anything. The late afternoon sun caught the chrome and scattered light across the storefronts on both sides of the road. The Hells Angels patch on each vest was visible from a long way off, worn without apology. They pulled into the lot with the practiced ease of men who had parked together so many times it had become choreography. 3 kickstands went down almost simultaneously. 3 engines cut. The silence that followed had weight. The 3 men who climbed off those bikes were different in the way brothers are different, sharing enough in the structure of their faces and the quality of their stillness to be clearly related, and different enough in the specific calibration of their bearing to be clearly themselves. The oldest who Vera would learn was Cole was 44 and carried his years the way good timber carries age. He was not the biggest of the 3, but he was the most solid, and the first thing he did after dismounting was look across the parking lot, scanning, cataloging. The same motion Vera had made when she pulled in that morning, the same motion she made anywhere she stopped. She had been making it for 30 years, and she could recognize it in someone else with the precision of a person who knows a thing from the inside. Cole's eyes found hers, held for a moment, moved on to his mother. The second brother, Vince, was lighter on his feet, quicker in his processing, the kind of person who had already read the situation by the time the others were still orienting. He was looking at the diner, at May's face, at the bruising along her cheekbone, and his expression moved through assessment and controlled fury before settling into something contained and purposeful. The youngest Rex was off his bike before the kickstand was fully engaged and crossing the lot toward his mother with the directness of a man who had stopped caring what it looked like. He was the one who felt everything the most visibly, and when he reached May and held her by the shoulders and looked at her face, what moved through his own was not an edited version of what he felt. Alarm and relief and a fury that he was working to keep from becoming something he would have to manage later. May held his face in her hands briefly, firm and short, the gesture of a mother reassuring a child who was larger than her and always had been, which changed nothing about what the gesture meant. Then Cole looked at Vera. "Who are you?" he said. It was not a question shaped like a question. It was the flat, specific inquiry of a man gathering information. "Vera Doss," she said. "I was here when it happened. I'm a witness. I have a photograph. You send that photograph somewhere, to someone who needed to see it." "Who?" Vera met his eyes. "To someone who will do something with it when the time is right." Cole looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. Then Rex turned from his mother and looked at Vera, and his version of the look had more temperature to it, the temperature of a younger man who has learned to distrust coincidence. You work for Morrison, he said. If I worked for Morrison, I wouldn't still be here, Vera said. Then why are you still here? The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. Vera looked at him steadily. Because your mother was the only person in this room who didn't look away when Tanner walked in, she said. And because, when she hit the floor, I made a decision I've been trying to make for 8 years. The quality of the silence shifted. Vince had come up alongside his brothers. He looked at Vera with the particular attentiveness of a man who assesses rather than reacts. And he was quiet for a moment before he said, my grandmother used to say, a person worth listening to doesn't need to say much to prove it. What you did this morning says enough. May said, come inside. There are things you need to see. Inside at the counter, she laid the envelope down. Cole read the document without expression. Passed it to Vince. Vince read it and passed it to Rex. Rex put it down on the counter and stood with both hands flat on the surface and looked at it. Guidry signed this, he said. Yes, May said. This wasn't Tanner on his own. It was never Tanner on his own. Rex looked up. Then going after Tanner doesn't solve it. No, Vera said. He looked at her sharply as though he had decided to stop including her and was now recalibrating. But there was no disagreement in his eyes. Just the frustration of a man who already knows something he was hoping was not true. Cole looked at Vera. What do you know about taking something like this to the right people? Enough, she said, but it has to be done correctly. One document with 3 signatures can be dismissed. Forged out of context, improperly obtained. You need more. And you need to get it to someone outside the local structure entirely. Taking evidence of the sheriff's involvement to the sheriff's office is not a strategy. Cole nodded slowly. What's the move? More evidence, more witnesses, someone outside this county with reason to take it seriously. She looked at the document. But first I need to understand what this land actually represents to them. The full picture, because I don't think it's only about natural gem. May looked at her. Something moved through her expression, the space between deciding and not deciding. Not yet, she said. There's more, but not yet. Vera did not push it. By 4:30, word had gone out. She did not ask exactly how Cole had done it, but within 90 minutes of the brothers arriving in Denton, other bikes began appearing. Not together, not loudly. In ones and twos from the north and east, pulling quietly into the lot and onto the street in front of the diner. Some riders came inside and spoke to May in low voices. Others stayed outside, leaning against their machines in the way of men who are waiting without appearing to wait and could become something else entirely inside of 30 seconds if the situation called for it. By 6 o'clock, there were 14 bikes distributed across the 4 approaches to Denton's small downtown. Nobody was threatened. Nobody was stopped. The riders were simply present, and their presence said something that did not need to be translated. A boundary had been drawn, not a physical one, a declaration of intent. Vera stood outside the diner and felt the temperature in the town change. Sheriff Walt Guidry arrived at 6:20 in his personal truck, clean and dark, and he parked on the street and climbed out with the ease of a man who had calculated precisely how relaxed to appear. 58 years old, gray at the temples, face composed in the way of someone who had held authority long enough to stop distinguishing between the authority and himself. He surveyed the bikes with an expression of careful arithmetic. He came inside. Cole was at the counter. Vince near the window, Rex in the kitchen doorway, May behind the counter, Vera in her corner booth where she had been all day. Guidry's eyes moved around the room and settled on Vera with a pause that lasted a fraction of a second longer than the pause he gave anyone else. He was recalibrating the same way Tanner had recalibrated, adjusting the picture to include a variable he had not prepared for. And you are, he said. Vera Doss, she said. Q Military Police Desert Storm. Witness to the assault this morning. I have documentation. Guidry looked at her for a moment with the specific quality of attention that a careful person gives to something they have not encountered before and are not sure how to categorize. Then he looked at Cole. Your mother okay, he said. She will be, Cole said. Oh, good. He nodded slowly. I want you to know I've spoken to Deputy Tanner. What happened here today was not acceptable. He's been suspended pending review. Nobody spoke. Rex said from the kitchen doorway, suspended. Pending review, Guidry repeated, with the possibility of termination. Who told him to come here, Rex said. Something moved in Guidry's expression, brief, controlled. He looked at Rex with the patience of a man who had prepared for this question. Deputy Tanner was acting outside the scope of his duties, he said. That's what the review will establish. Vera looked at her coffee cup. I think, Vince said quietly from near the window. What my brother is asking is whether there's a connection between your department's involvement and the pressure our mother has been under for 8 months. That would be a serious allegation, Guidry said. Yes, Vince agreed. We're not making it yet. The word yet held its place in the air. Guidry looked at Vera one more time. She looked back. The exchange lasted about 4 seconds, long enough to mean something. I hope we can keep this from escalating, he said. Nobody wants trouble. He went out. Vera watched through the window as his truck moved down Main Street and turned at Callaway Avenue and disappeared. She thought about the word suspended. She thought about the way Guidry had looked at her, not with the reflexive aggression of Tanner, not with the bluster of a man accustomed to being the most intimidating presence in the room. With assessment. With the quality of attention that a careful person gives to a new and unexpected variable. Rex appeared beside her. He sat down in the booth across from her without asking permission. He's buying time, he said. Yes. Tanner gets suspended. Everyone thinks it's handled. We relax. That's the idea. Are you going to relax? Vera looked at him. No. Rex looked back at her with an expression that was not quite trust and not quite its absence, but the space between them where a person lives when they are trying to determine which side of the line someone falls on. Preacher says you're straight, he said. Vera stilled. Preacher, she said. Rex looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of something warmer. He said you'd end up somewhere eventually. He didn't know it'd be here. Vera looked toward the window. Through the diner's glass, she could see the men in the lot in the low orange light of early evening, and among them at the far edge near the old oak, a figure she had not noticed arrive. Tall, white-haired, moving with the deliberateness of a man who had learned long ago that there was never any need to hurry. She stood up, she went outside. He was standing with his back to the oak hands in the pockets of a vest that had been through more years than most of the bikes in the lot. His hair was long and white, and his face had the quality of old leather that has been through enough weather to stop changing and simply exist. He was looking at Vera with an expression of complete absence of surprise, as if her presence in this specific parking lot on this specific Tuesday afternoon was something he had been expecting. They walked toward each other. When they met in the middle of the lot, they shook hands, the way people shake hands when they have stood in the same places under the same kind of pressure, and both of them know it. Preacher, Vera said. Vera. His voice was gravel under running water. Took you a while. I didn't know I was going anywhere specific. You never do, he said. But you always end up where something needs you. Vera looked at him. You knew about this situation. Been watching this county for 2 months, he said. There is more going on here than one woman and her land. I knew something would pull eventually. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know it would be you holding the thread. Vera looked across at the lit windows of the diner. How much do you know, Master Yamam? Enough to know there's more to know, he said. Same as you. Vince had come to stand in the diner doorway. He watched the exchange between Vera and Preacher and said something quiet to Cole. Cole answered, and then neither of them said anything else, but Vera could feel the shift in the room behind them. They understood something now that they had not understood 20 minutes ago. Vera had not arrived by chance. The photograph she had sent at 11:47 that morning had not gone to a stranger. The gear symbol in her contacts was not a random entry. There was a structure here that was older than today, and whatever that structure was, it had led things to this point. Inside the diner, Vera heard May return to the kitchen. The sounds of work being resumed. Pots. The clean percussion of someone doing something they had done 10,000 times and found every time that the doing of it kept them level. She was making pie. Cole came to stand beside Vera in the lot. There's more, he said, not a question. There's always more, Vera said. Do you know what it is? Not yet, but your mother does. She looked at him. She'll tell us when she decides to. That's her right. Cole was quiet for a moment. You trust her judgment. She's been managing this alone for 8 months without breaking, Vera said. That tells me everything I need to know about her judgment. Cole looked at the diner windows, at the silhouette of his mother moving through the lit interior. She never called us, he said. 8 months, she never called. Vera said nothing. She understood that this was not a complaint. It was something in the territory of grief and pride, and the particular difficulty of loving someone whose strength outruns their willingness to accept help. From inside the diner, May's voice, I think it's time you saw the rest of it. The sound of the refrigerator moving. A scrape. A silence, the scrape again. She came back carrying a folder thick with papers. She set it on the counter between them. This was never about my land, she said. The folder contained a technical report, 70-some pages prepared by an environmental engineer named Reed Harmon, and what it described in the precise and unsparing language of someone who had spent a career measuring what could not be argued with. Was this the proposed drilling site on May's 40 acres, set directly above the Barnett Shale Formation, and between that formation and the aquifer supplying groundwater to 12,000 people in western Callaway County? The barrier was exactly as thin as Harmon's calculations suggested it was. The drilling would fracture the shale. The fracturing would compromise the barrier. And when the barrier was gone, the gas formation and the water table would not remain separate. 12,000 people. Their wells, their municipal systems, their children's water. Vera set the report down. Reed Harmon, she said. Where is he now? He sent me this 6 weeks ago, May said, 3 days after he called to say he'd received threats. 2 days after that, he stopped answering. Then she paused. His office says he's on indefinite leave of absence. Rex said from the end of the counter, this is why they need it done quietly. This gets out before they have the land. The project doesn't get delayed. It gets killed. Which is why Friday matters, Vince said, before anyone can put this together and move it to the right people. Vera looked at May. You've been carrying this 6 weeks, alone. My boys have their own. Ma'am. Cole's voice carried no room for the sentence to continue. May looked at her oldest son. What moved through her face Vera looked away from. It was private in the way that certain exchanges between parents and children are private, regardless of who witnesses them. I know, May said quietly. I know that now. Vera looked at the report, then at the window. Then she said, we have until Friday morning. That means we have tonight and tomorrow to build this into something that can't be dismissed. She picked up her phone and went to the back of the diner. She made 2 calls. The first was to a reporter at the Dallas Morning News named Gerald Purcell, a man she had met at a veterans event in 2011 and stayed loosely in contact with in the way of people who recognize in each other a shared standard about what the truth was worth. He answered on the 3rd ring. She told him what she had in short, specific sentences. She heard his breathing change midway through. Send me everything, he said, tonight. The second call was to a number she had not dialed in several years. Dallas area code. She pressed call. 7 rings. Nash, said the voice. Doyle, it's Vera Doss. A short silence. Vera, you in trouble. Not personally, she said, but I'm standing in a situation that needs someone outside the local structure, and I think you need to hear about it. She laid it out the way she had been trained to lay things out. No editorializing. Facts flagged as facts, speculation flagged as speculation. The signed document, the pattern of pressure and coercion. Harold Fitch, Reed Harmon's report and subsequent disappearance. The name on the Lone Star Energy filings that Lena had traced through a Delaware shell company to Walter G. Guidry. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she became aware of her own breathing. Guidry, Nash said. His voice had shifted register. Vera, we have had a file open on Walt Guidry for 6 months. Land deal in the adjacent county, similar pattern. We hit a wall because there was no direct evidence and no witnesses willing to go on record. A pause. You're telling me you have a document with his signature on it. The document, a technical report connecting the project to public health consequences for 12,000 people and at least 3 landowners who have indicated willingness to speak on record. Send me everything tonight, Nash said. We'll be in Denton at 9 Friday morning. Vera, keep it calm until then. Don't let anything happen that gives Guidry cause to muddy the picture. She pocketed the phone and went back out to the counter. We have until morning, she said. Cole looked at her steadily. What happens in the morning? Someone comes who can actually do something with what we have, Vera said. Someone outside this county and outside the state structure. Until then, we don't escalate. We don't give Guidry any reason to create an incident that becomes the story instead of the real story. Rex looked at her, so we wait. We prepare, Vera said. There's a difference. She spent the next 2 hours photographing every page of Harmon's report and sending them to Purcell and Nash. Lena photographed the signed document. Cole worked the phones quietly, and by midnight, 2 of the landowners who had sold under pressure had agreed to speak to federal investigators in the morning. The diner went quiet around 11. Most of the chapter had dispersed to vehicles or the motel down the road. Preacher was in his truck asleep with the ease of a man who had learned to sleep anywhere because necessity had required it. Lena was in a corner booth with her laptop. Cole and Vince had arranged a watch rotation. Rex was in the kitchen doorway. Vera sat outside on the front step. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours, and she felt it in the specific way. She felt long wakefulness, not in her eyes or her head, but in her chest, a heaviness that had nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with the accumulated weight of a day that had held too much. She sat with her hands loosely clasped between her knees and looked at the empty street and let her mind go quiet in the way she had taught it to go quiet over years, over roads, over the kind of nights that do not resolve into sleep. She heard the door open. Rex sat down on the step beside her. He did not speak for several minutes. They looked at the street together, the unfocused gaze of people who were watching for something without knowing what it was. "You don't have to stay out here," he said. "I know." "Why are you—" Vera thought about it honestly. "Because I've never been able to sleep when something's unfinished," she said. "And because being inside felt like pretending the night was normal." Rex nodded. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Preacher mentioned you lost your husband," he said. Not prying, just acknowledging. 8 years ago, Vera said. "You have kids. A daughter, Denver. She has her own life. You talk to her." "Not as much as I should." Rex looked at the street. "Cole doesn't say it, but he thinks about it. Getting older. Whether you did enough." Vera looked at the sky, heavy and dark with the cloud cover the cold front had brought. 8 years ago, she said. "I stopped at a diner in Kansas. The man who ran it had just lost his wife. His children hadn't come. He was sitting alone at the counter in a room built for people, and he was the only one in it." She paused. "I ordered coffee, and I left a tip, and I got on my bike, and I drove away." Rex was very still. "I told myself it wasn't my business," Vera said. "I told myself there was nothing I could have done. I drove 200 miles before I understood that both of those things were true, and neither of them was the point." She looked at her hands. "I've thought about him every day since. I don't know his name. I don't know what happened to him. I just know I saw him, and I left." Rex said nothing for a moment. "When May hit the floor this morning," Vera said, "it was the first thing I thought of, him, the choice I made that day." She was quiet. "I'm 63 years old. I don't have answers for most things anymore. But I knew I was not going to sit in that booth and finish my eggs and drive away." The gray light that comes before morning had begun its work at the edges of the sky. Rex looked at it. "She trusts you," he said, "about his mother." "I know," Vera said. "I'm not going to make her sorry for that." The SUV arrived at 11 o'clock. Vera saw it before she heard it. A dark vehicle moving down Main Street with headlights on low, no markings, no visible plates from this angle. It turned into the lot with the unhurried certainty of a vehicle whose driver had already decided what was about to happen. 3 men got out, civilian clothes, but the way they moved said specific things about the men inside those clothes, things that civilian clothes could not entirely conceal from someone who knew what to look for. The one who came forward first was carrying a folded document. "May Calloway," he said, looking past Vera toward the diner door. "We have a court summons requiring her to appear at the county sheriff's office tonight regarding an ongoing investigation into unlicensed commercial activity." Vera looked at the document. She did not take it from his hand. She read it from where she stood, the way a person reads when they do not want to indicate compliance. And she read it with the knowledge of someone who had spent 8 years in military police, understanding exactly what a legitimate judicial document looked like, down to the formatting of the issuing authority line, the structure of the case number field, the placement of the judge's signature block. No case number, no valid seal. The judge's signature block was formatted incorrectly in 3 specific details that a civilian would never notice and a trained officer would identify in 15 seconds. "This document is not valid," Vera said. The man looked at her directly for the first time. He had been looking past her because he had categorized her as peripheral, and the recalibration was visible on his face. "Ma'am, I'd advise you to step aside. I'd advise you to tell whoever sent you that a forged judicial summons is a federal offense," Vera said, "and that I have been in contact with federal law enforcement tonight, and they are aware of the situation in this town." Something moved in the man's eyes, and then everything happened at once. Rex came through the diner door at a speed that made clear he had been watching from inside and had been holding himself back as long as he could and had reached the end of that. Cole was 2 steps behind him, reaching for Rex's arm. Rex was already in the space between Vera and the lead man, and the second man came around the side and shoved Vera hard into the doorframe, and she went down the wooden threshold, catching the side of her head above the ear, and the world went briefly sideways. She did not lose consciousness. But she was on one knee with blood coming warm down the side of her face before she had finished processing what had happened. From the doorway above her, May's voice, one word, stop. Everything stopped. May stood in the doorway of her diner looking down at the scene below her, at her sons, at Vera on one knee with blood on her temple, at the three men in the lot. She looked at all of it with the clear, steady gaze of a woman who has already made her decision before the circumstances have finished presenting themselves. Rex, she said. Her voice had the quality of something structural. Cole. Rex was breathing hard. Ma'am, stand down. He stood down. It cost him something that was visible in his whole body, but he did it. May looked at the man with the document. Then she looked at Vera. Vera was still on one knee, one hand pressed to the side of her head, and she looked up, and what passed between the two women in that look required nothing added to it. May had understood. She had understood from the moment she came to the door. If she refused to go, Rex would fight, and Cole would fight, and Guidry would have exactly what he needed to bury the story under assault charges and resisting officers and whatever else a corrupt sheriff could manufacture between now and Friday morning. I'll go, May said. She looked at the man. I want that document. I'm keeping it. She took it from his hand, folded it, put it in the pocket of her apron. Then she looked at Vera one more time. Quiet, clear, without a trace of fear. You know what to do, she said. She walked with them to the SUV. She got in without being touched. The vehicle turned out of the WUM and its taillights shrank down Main Street and went around the corner at Callaway Avenue and were gone. Rex sat down on the front step with his head bowed and his hands hanging between his knees. Cole stood with one hand on his brother's shoulder. Vince was on his phone, voice low. Preacher appeared at Vera's shoulder with a clean cloth from inside. She pressed it to her head and sat down on the step and let the world settle back into its right proportions. The bleeding was not serious. Head wounds overstated their case. She had learned that in the Gulf. She sat still for a moment and let the ringing fade. Then she picked up her phone and called Nash. It was past midnight. He answered before the second ring. They took her, Vera said. 3 men, unmarked vehicle, a document they represented as a court summons. I have strong reason to believe the document is forged. She has it with her. Is she physically safe? She's leverage, not a target. If they hurt her, everything falls apart for them. She paused. Doyle, I need you here earlier than 9. 7, he said. We'll be there at 7. A brief silence. If that document is what you think it is, they handed us everything we needed. Vera, get some sleep. She almost laughed. She went inside. Photographed the image of the document she had managed to capture on her phone before May took it and sent every image to Nash and Purcell. Then she photographed Harmon's report page by page and sent it all again because in situations like this, the only failure worse than sending too much was sending too little. Around 2 in the morning, Lena came and sat beside her. My editor called, Lena said. Her laptop was under her arm and her face had the drawn quality of someone who has been fighting something. Morrison's lawyers contacted the paper. They're threatening to sue. He wants me to pull the piece tonight. Vera looked at her. Before morning, Lena said. Before anyone can read it. Do you have everything documented? Yes. Then you don't pull it, Vera said. You send it somewhere bigger, tonight, before anyone can stop it. She paused. Purcell at the Dallas Morning News. Tell him Vera Doss sent you. He's already reading the background material. What you've built is not a local story anymore, and it hasn't been since Harmon's report. Let it be what it actually is. Lena looked at her laptop, at the empty street. Then she nodded once, the nod of a person who has been afraid of doing the necessary thing and has decided to stop letting the fear make the decision. Vera gave her the number and went back to the corner booth. She did not sleep. She sat in the dark diner in the booth where she had sat at 11:47 that morning, drinking her first cup of May's coffee, and she sat in the quiet building and let it settle around her, and thought about nothing in the way you think about nothing when you have done everything available to you and the rest is not yours to control. At some point, Rex came in and sat across from her. They sat in the dark for a long time before either of them spoke. Your head all right, he said. Fine, she said, and she meant more than the head. Rex turned his cup in his hands. The sky outside had gone from black to the first gray suggestion of morning. What made you stop this morning? He said, at this diner and not any of the others. Vera thought about it honestly. I don't know, she said. Something about the light on the windows. Something about the way the sign looked. She paused. Or maybe it was just that I was low on coffee, and this was the right moment to stop. Do you believe in that right moments? I believe in choosing to act when you have them, Vera said. Whether they're given or made, I'm not sure it matters. What matters is what you do with them. Rex looked at his hands. The man in Kansas, he said, not a question. He had been listening from the kitchen earlier, and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to acknowledge it. Yes, Vera said. You think about him? Every day for 8 years. Rex was quiet for a long moment. I think my mother will be okay, he said finally, not reassuring her, steadying himself. Your mother was okay before any of us arrived, Vera said. We're just making sure the people trying to break her run out of road. Rex looked at her. Something in his face had changed from the wariness of the afternoon, not fully open, but oriented differently. At 7 on the mark, Nash called. The summons document, he said without greeting. We've had 2 attorneys and a federal magistrate examine it this morning. It is definitively not a legitimate court instrument. No case number exists in the state system. The judge whose name appears on it has confirmed under oath that they signed nothing of the kind. A pause. Whoever produced that document and used it to remove a civilian from her residence committed forgery of a judicial instrument and unlawful detention under color of authority. Those are federal charges. Vera sat up straight. It also means, Nash continued, this is no longer just a corruption investigation. Last night they committed an active federal crime with physical evidence and witnesses. He paused. Vera, they gave us everything. Reed Harmon, Vera said, the engineer. Already found him. Dallas agent tracked a credit card charge to a motel in Waco at 5 this morning. He has been there for 3 weeks. He has the original report at all field data, his lab notes. He called our agent back within 20 minutes of being contacted. A brief silence. He said he would talk to anyone who would actually listen. Vera closed her eyes. We're pulling into Denton in 40 minutes, Nash said. 3 federal vehicles came down Main Street at 9:14 and turned into the lot with the quiet efficiency of vehicles driven by people who knew exactly what they were there to do. Doyle Nash stepped out of the lead car and they shook hands. The way people shake hands when the last time they stood in the same place they were both wearing desert camouflage, and 20 years had moved through the world since then, and they had both kept going. You look like you had a rough night, he said, looking at the dried blood at her temple. I've had worse, Vera said. I know, I was there for 2 of them. He looked at the diner that bikes the town. Let's finish it. What happened in the following 2 hours was not dramatic in the way that certain ideas about justice are dramatic. No sirens, no standoffs. Federal agents went to the county building, into a house on the north side of town, and to a restaurant 11 miles out on the county road. They carried valid documents and followed procedure and did the methodical necessary work that the law looks like when it is actually being practiced rather than being performed. Walt Guidry was at his desk when they arrived. He was calm. That was the thing Vera thought about later when she heard the details. He had the composure of a man who had built something deliberately over a long time and understood that its ending would come the way its construction had, one document at a time, without noise. He asked for his attorney. He was informed he could call from the federal building in Dallas. He stood up from the desk where he had sat for 21 years, and he walked out of his own office, and he did not look back at the town he had managed and used and deceived. And in the not looking back, there was something that was almost dignity until you remembered what it had cost. Calvin Morrison was at home in a bathrobe. Bryce Tanner was at a roadside restaurant eating eggs. At 11:14 in the morning, May Calloway walked out of the side entrance of the county sheriff's building into the clean, hard light of a Friday in October. Her hair was still pinned. Her back was straight. The bruise along her cheekbone had deepened overnight into something that moved between plum and deep red depending on the angle of the light, the physical record of what had been done to her and what she had refused to let it mean. She walked the way she always walked, the walk of a woman who had decided a long time ago that the things that happened to her would not have the final say over how she moved through the world. Her 3 sons were at the gate. Cole reached her first. He opened his arms and she stepped into them, and he held her the way a large man holds someone he is afraid of breaking, and her arms came around him and her hands pressed flat against his back, and she stood there with her eyes closed for a moment, whose length was not the point. Then Rex, who did not try to make his face into something other than what it was when he held her. Then Vince, who held her longest and rocked her slightly, the small rocking motion of comfort that does not need to be explained or justified. Vera stood 15 feet away. She did not move toward them. She looked at the water tower at the end of the street with the town's name in faded blue, at the hardware store, at the barbershop pole, still turning at the ordinary continuing existence of a place that had nearly been hollowed out from the inside, and she thought about how underrated ordinary was. That the pole was still turning, that May was walking out straight-backed into the light, that these things were not small. Preacher appeared beside her. He looked at the family at the gate, then at Vera. He nodded once slowly, the nod of a man for whom a thing has gone the way it needed to go. That afternoon, Vera sat in the corner booth one final time. May had opened the diner at 11 because she was the kind of person for whom routine was not rigidity, but a form of dignity that nobody had the right to take from her. The regulars came in and looked at her face and said things around the bruise rather than about it, the language of people who understand that sometimes the presence of a person is the more important statement than any words spoken about what they have been through. May brought pie, cherry, set it down without asking. Vera ate it slowly. When she put on her jacket, May came around from behind the counter. They stood across the table from each other in the mighty slanted October light, and what was between them did not require filling. "You're heading out," May said. "I have road left," Vera said. May nodded. She understood the language and what it meant and what it did not mean. "That man in Kansas," she said. She had been in the kitchen with the door open the night before. They both knew. Neither acknowledged it directly. "He would want you to know," May said. "Whatever happened to him, wherever he is. He would want you to know what you did with the thing he gave you." Vera looked at her. "What did he give me?" May looked back with the gray-green eyes that had been clear through everything this week had required of them. "A reason to stop," she said. "Eventually." She went to the counter and cut a slice of pie and wrapped it in wax paper and held it out across the counter. Her hands still swollen at the joints, still steady. "For the road," she said. Vera took it. Cole was standing at the Harley when Vera came out. The afternoon had the clean, particular quality that follows a cold front, the sky at a shade of blue that belongs specifically to October in Texas, the air sharp enough to give everything a slight additional definition. "I don't know how to do this right," he said. "You don't have to," Vera said. "I've said thank you before, and it never fit what I meant." She looked at him. "A person does what they can when they can. Your mother was the one who held the line for 8 months. She was the one who walked out of that building this morning with her back straight. I was passing through at the right time." "You could have kept passing," he said. "I've done that before," Vera said. "I'm trying to do it less." They shook hands, the kind that closes something and opens something else at the same time. Rex was near the diner door. He raised a hand. She raised one back. Preacher walked with her to the bike and stood beside it while she put on her helmet. "You going to be all right?" he said. "I'm always all right," she said. "Doesn't mean I'm always fine." He looked at her with the eyes of a man who had known her for 30 years and understood the difference between those two things. "The road'll be there," he said. "So will we." She swung onto the bike. The engine caught. The sound of it moved through the lot and down the quiet length of Main Street, and Vera pulled out and did not look back because she had learned that looking backward while moving forward was how you ended up belonging fully to neither direction. 2 years passed. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality issued a protected designation for May's 40 acres following the publication of Reed Harmon's report, which Lena Marsh's investigation had assembled into a framework that the Dallas Morning News ran across 11 consecutive days. The series was cited in a subsequent state legislative review of drilling regulations near residential aquifer zones. Lena received the Texas Press Association Award for investigative reporting the following spring. She accepted it in a room full of people who had not been in a diner in Denton on a Tuesday morning in October, which meant she was the only person in the room who fully understood what the work had been for and what it had actually cost. Walt Guidry was convicted in a federal courtroom in Dallas on 3 counts of corruption of public office and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. Calvin Morrison accepted a plea agreement. Bryce Tanner was convicted of assault under color of authority and lost his law enforcement certification permanently and would not work in that capacity again in any state. Harold Fitch's daughter flew in from Phoenix and spent 2 weeks in Denton. She met May on her second day. They had coffee together. Some things that had happened to Harold could not be repaired, but the conversation was honest, and it helped in the specific way that honest conversations help even when they cannot restore what has been taken. Reed Harmon opened an environmental consulting practice in Dallas. He took on 3 water contamination cases in his first year. He sent May a card at Christmas, and she sent one back, and this became an annual small exchange between 2 people connected by an act of courage that had passed through each of them differently. Cole, Vince, and Rex came to Denton the first weekend of every month, not because anything required it, just because the diner was there, and their mother-made pie, and some places earned the right to be returned to without needing a reason beyond the returning. In November, on a road in New Mexico, somewhere between Albuquerque and the open horizon of the desert, Vera's phone rang. She pulled to the shoulder. The desert ran flat and rust-colored to the mountains in every direction. The sky was the enormous pale blue of high altitude, and the road ahead was straight for as far as the eye could organize space into distance. Cole Calloway, she answered. Vera. His voice was the same as it always was, steady and unhurried, saying exactly what needed to be said, and not a word more. Mom made pie this morning. She wanted to know if you'd be coming through Denton this month. Vera looked at the road ahead, at the mountains, at the long and open miles between here and Texas. Tell her to save me a piece, she said. A brief silence on the line. Then she'll want to make a fresh one. Tell her I'll be there before it goes cold, Vera said. She ended the call and sat for a moment with the engine running. The desert was quiet in the way that large empty places are quiet, which is not silence but a different register of sound, the sound of space itself having a quality. She thought about a man in a diner in Kansas whose name she would never know. She thought about what May had said that he would want her to know. She thought that probably he would. That probably he had lived whatever came after that Tuesday and had found his way through it without needing Vera Doss to be the thing that saved him. That the debt she had felt she owed was not the kind you paid by going back to the place where you incurred it. It was the kind you paid by going forward differently. She had been going forward differently for 1 year now. It was not a long time, but it was not nothing. She had a daughter in Denver she needed to call more often. She had a road in front of her that would take her through places that needed her in ways she would not know until she arrived. She had a pie waiting for her in a diner on the corner of Main and Callaway Avenue, in a small town in Texas that had a water tower with faded blue lettering and a barbershop pole that still turned, and a woman in a blue and white checked apron who had taught her, without intending to teach her anything, that the difference between courage and stubbornness was the quality of the thing you were refusing to surrender. She put the bike in gear. She drove toward Denton. The road was long and the October light was clean, and somewhere in the flat distance ahead of her, the mountains of Texas shimmered in the late morning air, like something almost but not quite certain, the way good things look when they are real but not yet arrived, when you are close enough to know they are there, and far enough that the getting there still means something. Vera rode, and the road did what roads do when you let them. It held her and moved under her and carried her forward the way it had always done, the way it would keep doing all the way to the next place she was supposed to stop.